turbo engine running. Absolute genius.
Get this.
Welcome.
This is the show where we bring you
Science.
What that essentially means is
discoveries,
Advances.
questions,
Research.
technology.
Unbelievable.
Without further ado,
This is The Naked Scientists. Hello, welcome to the Naked Scientists podcast, the show that brings you the biggest breakthroughs and talks to the major movers and shakers in the worlds of science, technology and medicine. I'm Chris Smith, and today, as the world population surges towards 9 billion and existing agriculture struggles to cope, we're asking, what does science have in store for the foods of the future? On the menu, salmon grown from stem cells that diners say they can't tell isn't real, and spreads and oils made from methane. Yes, you better believe it. Over the past few months, John Innes Centre Plant Sciences PhD student Petra Merzen has been working with us as part of a professional internship programme. Soon, she'll be heading off back to the lab bench, but before leaving, she wanted to make a programme about the foods of the future, how the food industry is using science to engineer alternatives to the dishes and ingredients that we currently consume, but with a much lower environmental footprint, a superior nutritional profile, and without compromising on the flavour and texture. People have got to want to eat this stuff, after all, otherwise there won't be a market for it. Revo Foods is an Austrian food tech company pioneering the use of 3D printing technology and protein produced by cultured fungi as a raw material to create replicas of high-ticket foodstuffs like salmon fillets. David Patuzzi is the CEO.
Revo Foods is using a 3D structuring technology, which sounds very complicated. But what you're trying to do is to replicate authentic plant-based whole cuts, such as salmon and whitefish fillets and also chicken fillets. 3D structuring has the benefit that we can integrate protein and fat material, which means that we can create more authentic products.
When you say 3D technology, I mean, is this basically 3D printing for food?
Exactly. Basically, food production was always 2D food printing. What we added now is a third dimension, which means the production machinery can go in different directions in 3 dimensions, which adds the benefit that you can create different forms and structures to the product.
What are the materials involved, though? Because if you think about a 3D printer printing something out of plastic, you have reels of material that you melt to put into the thing you're building. What are the equivalent of those reels that you do for food?
Our main protein material that we use is mycoprotein. It's a fungi-based protein which grows in a bioreactor, so a big tank where sugar and other nutrients are added to the fungi. And this material then grows in the tank over time. Normally it doubles every 5 hours in the bioreactor, so in the tank, which means this is a very sustainable way to produce protein. And this biomass we take as our protein source. We add oils such as algae oil for the omega-3 fatty acids and flavors to the product. This we put into a tank, and then through the 3D production process, the biomass, so the material, the protein, is put into structure and form.
Do you have multiple nozzles then that do different things or apply the layers separately so that you can create something like an authentic bit of salmon? It would fool me into thinking that is a slice of salmon.
Exactly. So there are like 2 benefits of having a multi-nozzle system, and this is actually also where one of our patents lay. So the first benefit is that if we use 2 nozzles for one fillet, we can use one nozzle for the protein material and the other nozzle for the fat fibers, and then integrate those layers and materials with each other. And through this, you can create this layering effect, and this also will remind you when you taste it more of the actual thing, so the salmon fillet.
In terms of what it tastes like, would I be fooled if you plonked one of these down in front of me and also the real deal? Would I be able to tell them apart?
If we ask consumers, and also obviously on social media, we get a lot of different feedback. Sometimes we hear the feedback, okay, If I wouldn't have known that it's plant-based, I wouldn't even have differentiated it from the real thing. So that's probably the best feedback you can get. And this is also what we aim for with the product.
Nutritional value? How does it stack up? Because you're making something look like salmon and taste like salmon, but actually it's fungus. So is it as good for me or even better for me than the real deal?
We aim for having the same protein content, same omega-3 fatty acid content, and being lower in calories because we have more unsaturated fat than saturated fat, which means in the end it will be better for your body. Also considering then if you eat fish from the sea, that most of the time you have antibiotics in the product, and this is obviously something that we have not in there. So it's also, we have the benefits of the real thing, but we do not have the disadvantages of the real thing, like mercury, which is obviously not in our product.
How long does it take you to print a sheet of fish though? Because one of the constraints with technologies like this is it can be very time consuming to mass produce things at the sorts of scales that a market would demand.
If you have several nozzles, and we currently have 16 nozzles per machinery, we can produce 8 fillets at a time. And then we want to add more and more printers and production machineries to our facility. Currently we have 6, which means we can create an output of 6 tons per month. And this is already quite significant and can lead to an industrial scale.
At the moment, you're copying what really exists in nature. But does this open the door to a whole new food regime where we can basically have the sky as the limit? You think, well, we can make any food you want now. We can print anything. We can make any flavors, any combinations of different oils, fats, proteins. And effectively, you can make a whole new generation of foods that just don't exist at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the big benefit of 3D printing, that you can basically combine materials, create textures, structures, and forms that have never been there before. However, the limitation currently is the consumer. So if you go into the store and then you see a completely new product that you've never seen before and you cannot relate anything to, you might be hesitant to buy this product. So this is why we, for the start, are focusing to replicate products which are easier for the consumer to use. However, for the future, if you go into personalization of food, there will be many opportunities coming up and will be also very interesting to use this technology for.
What about price? Because at the end of the day, that is the thing that decides the market. And if it costs too much, people are just not going to buy it.
Right now, we already price parity with premium products. We are currently at a price point of 35 euros per kilo, which means we're in the mid to premium segment. And this is also something that we want to keep for in the future, as we, with a highly nutritious, high quality product, can also differentiate from the rest.
We're only one interview in and this show is already making me hungry. David Patuzzi there at Revo Foods. About a fifth of the calories that we consume every day in a healthy diet should come from fats. And oils and butter are a major part of that. But common sources of these, cows and palm oil plantations, command a high environmental cost through impacts like methane emissions and deforestation. And this is where Kathleen Alexander, the co-founder and CEO of the company Savor, comes in. Her company is bypassing conventional agriculture to build fats and oils, which are just chains of carbon atoms after all, directly from CO2, water and methane. The results are sufficiently good that Michelin-starred chefs and acclaimed bakeries are now using the products.
Savor is transforming how fats and oils are made for food. So if you think about kind of the planetary footprint of the food system, we currently use about half the habitable land on our planet for making all of the food that we eat. And about a third of that can be attributed to fats and oils. And Savor was born really out of the question of, is there a smaller footprint, much less impactful way that we can make this core macronutrient for humans?
How do you do it? Because obviously they do it by, as you say, devoting enormous amounts of land area to growing stuff that will yield oils, whether that is rapeseed, canola, or sunflowers, or date palms. There are a range of ways of getting those oils. So what are you doing that's different?
Exactly. So today, the way that fats and oils get made is that we first clear large areas of land, and plant seeds in them. And then we have energy that comes down from the sun in the form of photons. And that energy drives a synthesis process in plants by which plants can take CO2 from the air, they can take hydrogen from water, and they can assemble them into all the molecules that we eat, and especially fats and oils. What Savor does actually is kind of similar in terms of the inputs and the outputs. We can also, take molecules like CO2, or we can actually even take other sources of carbon like methane, and we assemble them into those same molecules, into fats and oils. But instead of using photons from the sun as the driving force, we can actually use heat energy to put those molecules together. And if we're doing that, we actually don't need to do it in the bodies of plants. So we don't need to clear that kind of vast area of land. And we can, with kind of much higher efficacy, make really delicious fats and oils, but on just a much smaller footprint.
How do you actually make them, though? What is the biosynthetic process that means that those carbon sources that you mentioned can turn into long chains? Because fats are long strings of molecules, carbon, 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 surrounded by hydrogen. How do you do what the plant does?
You asked what kind of biosynthetic process we use, and we actually don't use a biosynthetic process. Ours is an organic synthesis method. And so the process starts by, again, sourcing the building blocks for fats and oils. So you mentioned we need carbon, we need hydrogen. We actually also need a little bit of oxygen in the case of fatty acids that our body is able to metabolize for energy. So that can be CO2 and water, that can be methane. Really, any source of carbon that you can find is a viable starting material for a process like ours. Because the first step is to actually kind of activate that starting source of carbon into a gaseous state called syngas. That syngas is made up of CO, or carbon monoxide, and hydrogen, H2. And so we have the activated molecules that then we can assemble together using just a straightforward organic synthesis.
How long can you make your carbon chains? Because the ones we've got in the body, they're more than 10 carbon atoms strung together, aren't they? Maybe up to 16 carbon atoms or so long. So how long can you go?
The fats that we kind of typically think about, so whether from like a milk fat to a palm oil to the kind of canola oil that you mentioned at the beginning, those take in carbon chain lengths ranging from about C4 to about C22 or so. We specifically have tuned our synthesis to make fatty acids that are in that kind of core range for our macronutrient diet, which is the C4 to C22.
Is it scalable? If you look at the volume of these fats that are being consumed by industry and also by us as just consumers, it's absolutely huge, isn't it, around the world? So to make a dent in that, you've got to be able to do it at massive scale.
If the mission behind what we're building here is really about planetary impact, it is kind of irrelevant if we can't get to planetary scales. And so the scale of the fats and oils industry today is on the order of hundreds of millions of tons. And we specifically chose this platform. Again, I pointed out the fact that it's an organic synthesis platform, and that was very intentional. We looked at kind of all of the options of how we could make this macronutrient. And we actually very specifically chose this one because of its scalability. The different unit operations, so I talked about, first activating kind of carbon in the form of gas and then assembling that into long chains, converting those long chains to fatty acids. All of those different processes actually already happen at world scales today. Just in kind of across a couple of different industries. So by putting together those different building blocks, we actually already know what the economics and viability of this process look like at scale. And so it was being able to do that kind of analysis on paper years ago, before we ever started this company, that really motivated us that this was kind of a world-changing opportunity that we could turn around and bring to the world, bring to industry with actually like very rapid deployment.
Are people actually eating the product?
They are. That's one of the things that we're very proud of. It took a couple of years to get to market. We had to go through regulatory approval because this is a novel ingredient. So we have our fats and oils at a couple of different restaurants in the US. We work with some local bakeries and chocolatiers.
How does it stack up nutritionally, though? Because a few decades ago, there was a lot of fanfare around hydrogenated vegetable oils, and basically it turned out that all that glitters isn't gold, and there are unforeseen health impacts or other consequences. So is there any evidence of a health disbenefit from doing this?
The entire goal of our company has been to make delicious fats and oils that are at least as healthy as the fats and oils that we eat today. Now, we have been a little bit reticent to go out and make a kind of very strong health claims about the positive benefits, health benefits of the fats and oils that we're making. However, there has been a lot of scientific development in fats and oils, kind of nutritional studies. And one of the things that we see is that the use of both medium chain fatty acids, short chain fatty acids, and odd chain fatty acids are actually linked to positive health outcomes in the case of the first two. So for short chain fatty acids, we're looking at things like gut health, things like brain health as having kind of very positive associations with the presence of those in the gut. In the case of medium chain fatty acids, that's an area where metabolic health and overall cardiovascular performance has been linked to improvements. And then odd chain fatty acids have some links to both metabolic performance as well as cardiac outcomes. And so the reason I bring up those three classes is because they are in some cases more rare in animal fats and in plant fats, but we actually make them in higher abundance. And so we, from the very early stages of this company, have actually thought that there may be some nutritional benefits to the fatty acids that we make. But we are not going out and making claims ourselves about those, but that's where the literature is pointing. And we are, currently in conversations with the folks doing those studies to see if we can help provide them more material to work with, since it's actually harder for them to source these in some cases.
It sounds good, doesn't it? Kathleen Alexander there at Savour. And now, being very fond of a nice bit of buttered toast for breakfast, I was very eager myself to try some of Kathleen's products, and she has kindly sent me some from across the pond. But unfortunately, at the time of recording, the courier hasn't arrived yet. So I will have to leave you hungry to hear what this tastes like. I will report back with my verdict next time.
The Naked Scientists podcast is produced in association with Spitfire, cost-effective voice, internet and IP engineering services for UK businesses. Find out how Spitfire can empower your company at spitfire.co.uk.
This is the Naked Scientist podcast with me, Chris Smith, and this week we are delving into the foods of the future. What will we be eating in the years ahead? On the way, making meat and salmon from stem cells. But first, vitamin D deficiency is a major public health concern. As many as 1 billion people worldwide are affected. We get about 80% of our vitamin D from sun exposure on our skin. But there's an old saying that if your shadow is taller than you are, you're not making any vitamin D. In other words, in places where the level of sun exposure is more limited, especially at certain times of the year, and the UK is a classic example, most people end up vitamin D deficient, at least for a while. This has been linked to bone problems, low mood, increased susceptibility to infection, and even to autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis. So researchers at the John Innes Centre in Norfolk have developed gene-edited tomatoes that naturally produce a precursor of vitamin D that can be absorbed when we eat them. The Vital D study now underway is testing whether the consumption of these new tomatoes can do what the text says on the tin and supplement vitamin D levels in the UK population during the winter. Petra Merzen got in touch with the John Innes Centre's Jonathan Clark to hear how it works.
Here we have tomatoes that are able to produce vitamin D. Are they any different from any other tomatoes at sea? Would I be able to differentiate the two just by looking at them?
Interesting question. And the answer is possibly yes. What we're doing at the moment is we're actually putting in another gene that makes the tomato stripy. So when you see this tomato, it's going to have yellow stripes on it. And that means that you will know that you're eating a tomato that is different. But in all other terms, and in terms of its composition, with the exception of the vitamin D, it's absolutely identical to a tomato that you would buy on the shelf.
So is the taste any different, or have you tasted it first of all? Do you think it's any different?
So we have tasted it. When we initially created it, we put it into a tomato which was easy to manipulate. It wasn't a tomato which was the most tasty tomato. So what we've been doing now is to move it into a background where we can improve the taste. And my colleagues are actually using special methods to make sure that we get the taste profile just right.
Why tomatoes? Why have you chosen to edit tomatoes and not any other vegetable fruit?
There are two reasons. The first is to do with genetics. You can only achieve the production of vitamin D in certain species. So these are Solanaceae species. So we could have put it into potato, but actually it's much better in tomato. The second reason to choose tomato is because it is so widely consumed. So as a fruit, it's one of the most widely consumed across the globe. It's eaten by most cultures. And so when we're trying to make this vitamin D biofortified tomato available, it's about, can we reach as many people as possible?
What you want to do is to increase its vitamin D content and then use the tomato as a supplement for vitamin D. How did you achieve that? How could you make a tomato produce vitamin D?
Two things I want to touch on. First is about, you mentioned supplement. I don't think I look at this tomato as a supplement. This is food, healthier, nutritionally dense food. That's what we're at. A supplement is a pill. When you eat a food, you are much better able to absorb the enrichment that you've put, in this case, vitamin D. It also means you don't have to take a tablet. It means that you can get it into everybody just as part of their normal daily diet. How did we do it? This comes back to the reason which I said we were limited. So we couldn't do this in all plants. Tomato makes some compounds which are similar to vitamin D. What we had to do was we had to disrupt a pathway leading to the production of vitamin D. So we make a single gene deletion. So we basically take a gene out, and that gene has a step in terms of converting the compound from one form into another. And what happens by doing that is we shifted it. And then it went through, and it actually makes what's called provitamin D3. Provitamin D3 is what our bodies make. When we are exposed to sunlight, our bodies are able to convert provitamin D3 into D3, which then has the benefit. So what we are making is the same product as is made in humans. And guess what? Tomatoes, when they're exposed to sunlight, convert provitamin D to D3. So we can put the tomato into sunlight or expose it to UV, and it will convert the provitamin D3 to D3.
Instead of us getting a tan to produce vitamin D, then you have the tomatoes getting a tan and producing the vitamin D, and then we eat it.
Yes, in essence, that's correct. You need to remember that it's only when we expose quite a bit of our body to sunlight that we make this conversion. So just by going out fully clothed with a hat on, you're probably not going to get very much conversion. We often wear clothes to protect ourselves from sunburn or for cultural reasons. So it's not always easy, even when the weather is really good, to get that conversion.
How much vitamin D are those tomatoes are able to supplement us?
Well, roughly speaking, you're probably going to have to eat 4 of those, which is about a portion, to give you the recommended daily dose of vitamin D.
Together with the Quadram Institute and the University of Surrey, you've started a trial to try and see the effects of this tomato, right? Can you let us know about it? How is it going?
Well, it's going really well so far. So we've done the first trial. We are going to embark on doing a second trial fairly shortly. What the trial is trying to do is it's trying to ask a question, which is, can your body actually absorb the vitamin D that is in the tomatoes? And so this basically allows us to get the evidence. It also makes sure that there's nothing to worry about. So we can actually see how much is taken up. So we can make sure that when this tomato comes to market and you buy this tomato, you're not going to overdose yourself on vitamin D because the tomatoes won't make enough for that to be possible.
Yeah, this is an amazing idea. Everyone hates taking supplements and they forget them and they never know what they should take. And having these vitamins or these important nutrients in vegetables makes it way easier for us to then have a fully balanced diet and get all these micronutrients. And since this is a very captivating idea, can you see biofortification of fruits and vegetables becoming more and more common in our future to get, for example, other things that we don't get as often as vitamin B12 or iron, for example.
Absolutely. One of the reasons that we started this was to exactly achieve that you have just described. One of the things that's happened over time when we have bred varieties of fruits and vegetables is that we've not followed the nutritional value. We've tended to think about what makes them something that you want to eat. So the obvious one is to make them sweet. Sweetness is great, make you want to eat it, but you didn't think about, well, what was the nutritional value? And when we have food that is nutritionally poor, you eat food, but you don't get as much value from it. And then you have to take supplements and other things. So wouldn't it be great if that was just built into your plant? Plants can make these things naturally. We just forgot to select for them. So what we're trying to do is to accelerate that process to make the future sets of vegetables and fruits that you eat more nutritionally dense. My colleague Kathy Martin, who is the scientist behind this innovation, talks about food as healthcare and medicine as sick care. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to make food healthcare.
Jonathan Clark at the John Innes Centre. He was speaking with Petra Merzen. Now, could the future of dairy come from a brewery rather than a barn? Science has now found a way to produce dairy cheese, but without milking any cows. Instead, through a process called precision fermentation, microorganisms like yeasts and certain bacteria are engineered to make the same proteins, in this case caseins, which are normally found in cow's milk. These proteins are then combined with sugars, water and vitamins in the right proportions to more closely resemble milk and then used to create animal-free cheese.
I am Christian Poppe. I lead Foremost global public affairs engagement as well as regulatory and our commercial activities in the Asia Pacific and Middle East region, making food biotechnology real. We address a specific problem, which is fundamentally that the food system as we know it is massively constrained against the backdrop of a growing population and a skyrocketing protein demand. And the conventional agriculture production chain has reached its limits a long time ago, so that as mankind, we need to find new ways of developing, making, and scaling high-value compounds such as proteins. We have been looking into how can we replicate these high-value compounds in the same purity, the same quality, same functionality, so that large food and beverage manufacturers can use the proteins we develop and apply them to the consumer products that they want to commercialize.
And what food are you chiefly going for in the first instance here?
Humans need protein. So we look specifically into the casein protein, which is one of the proteins in milk and dairy. Casein is essentially the backbone of cheese making. It is considered the holy grail and the key ingredient to make delicious, creamy, meltable, stretchy cheeses without relying on the cow. So when we start developing a protein, we first look at various microorganisms, bacteria, yeast, and we look into that microorganism as a production host of the protein. And we then provide this organism with a blueprint. And that blueprint gives the organism the information it needs in order to produce the target compound, our casein, in a complex fermentation process, so that it produces at a high density in that fermentation process the protein that we are going for.
How do you make sure that the protein that you get is and the composition is the same as comes out of the cow? Because the cow's udder cells are going to do various things to the protein beyond just making or following a genetic instruction. We know this goes on in all our tissues. So a yeast isn't necessarily going to know how to do that until you tell it. So how do you make sure that the casein that comes out from this is what would be as good as what comes out from a cow?
So we genetically modify the yeast, the bacteria, the microorganism by inserting the DNA, the genetic information of the cow, so that it knows what it needs to do. And that is producing different compounds that it would normally produce. So like the cow provides that information to its microorganism, to its body, we provide the exact same information to the microorganism.
Once you've separated the casein off, does it then behave in the same way as if this were milk for real? Do you just basically use a normal cheese making process, or is it more specialist in order to do this?
Yes, so once you have completed the downstream purification, then that mixture is filtered. You need to isolate the casein, completely purify it from the host microorganism and the liquid broth. And then you are in a position where you have the animal-free casein made through biotechnology. And then, depending on the application you are going for, you would, for example, create a recombinant casein-based milk by adding a plant-based fat, by adding water. But also, when you talk about cheese making, the enzyme rennet. So most cheeses are already using precision fermentation rennet, which is the name for the technology we are talking about today. And in dairy alternatives, replicating animal-free casein proteins is what guarantees stretch and melt in an authentic way to make those indulgent, creamy, melty cheeses.
Nutritionally, have you got a head-to-head comparison if you look at your product and you look at what would have been made traditionally? Are they equivalent, or are there any advantages of your product over, apart from the environmental ones, in health and nutrition terms compared to traditionally made cheeses, for example?
So the amazing thing when we talk about nutritional profiles of precision fermented milk is that as the innovators in the space, we can engineer the product and the application to precisely match or even exceed the nutrition and nutritional profile of traditional cow's milk. It is cholesterol-free, and of course, it is hormone and antibiotics-free. And one thing maybe to add is that the protein content is, of course, very important. So that is on par with traditional whole cow's milk, but 3 to 4 times more protein content than in plant-based milks. And then also the protein qualities is on par with traditional whole milk. And then, of course, we have much less sugar and 0 lactose.
I don't like repeating myself, but I am getting more and more peckish the longer this programme goes on. Christian Popper at Formo there. Now, finally today, salmon consumption worldwide is 3 times higher than it was in 1980, and the demand continues to increase dramatically. Much of this is currently being met by fish farming, but this has significant knock-on impacts on the environment. With intensive pisciculture, pathogens and parasite numbers surge, fish fecal and nitrogenous waste causes algal blooms, and the fish themselves tend to be less healthy because they don't move about as much. So what's the alternative? Well, Wildtype, a food tech company based in the US, uses stem cells to grow salmon meat from scratch in specialised culture conditions to, as Aria Elfenbein explains, produce something with the taste, texture and nutritional characteristics of conventional salmon that consumers can't tell apart from the real thing.
Wildtype is a startup in San Francisco that is growing cuts of seafood outside of the animal. That might seem like a bit of a strange idea, but if you think about the very smallest unit of what becomes the food that we eat, typically it's cells. And so rather than growing cells into, for example, an entire fish, we actually just grow the cells into a piece of sashimi or a tuna steak. And so that is the basic of the technology. In other words, why do we need to go to the oceans to harvest fish. There are so many consequences of that, and especially ones that we're seeing more and more of today. Why do we need to go through that entire process when actually we can just grow the food that we need?
How does it work? How do you get that group of cells to turn into something resembling a nice cut of tuna?
We had to go to the fish for the first cells. That was in 2018. And we have not needed to return to the animal since then. And so from that fish, we were able to extract a few cells, and we knew enough about basic nutrients that cells need to grow. And over time, we're able to find these self-renewing group of cells, so cells that would continue to grow naturally on their own, and eventually cultivate those into larger and larger collections of those cells that we could reliably continue to grow.
Now, the thing about a mussel is it's a tissue. It's not just a monoculture of one type of cell. There are going to be other cells in there, some muscle cells, supporting cells, there will be some blood vessels. So there's a range of different things that give that tissue its structure, its integrity, and its features that then ultimately contribute to the taste and so on. So do you get all the mixtures of cells that you would see in the real deal?
The cells that we work with the most are ones that have partially chosen a career path. And by that I mean there are cells that maybe haven't completely become muscle or fat or some of the connective tissue, but actually have the ability to behave like all of those. And those are the types of cells that we use. And what we found is that depending on the environment that we grow them in, they will behave very differently. So if we have pretty stiff, sturdy environment and put these cells to grow on that background, they'll behave a little bit more like what bone cells would behave like. When we put them in a very soft environment that has a lot of fat around, they actually behave more like fat cells. And so that's kind of the basis for how we can achieve some of the complexity that we're able to see in the seafoods that we create.
And so do you grow different tissues in different environments and bring them together to make something resembling fish? Or do you change the environment as the process evolves?
Cells in a big steel tank don't know how to just come together and become sushi. We actually need to create the structure for them to know where the white bands should be, how to sort of line up in the right way. And that structure, which we call a scaffold, is made of plant-based materials. Typically sugars and proteins and things that you would imagine would be helpful to create these structures for cells to organize.
How long does it take? Is this a viable process? Because if it takes 3 weeks to grow one bit of sushi, it's just not going to cut it, is it? But if you can turn it around really quick at the sorts of scale and volume that the market would demand.
Actually, 3 weeks is great when you consider that in fish farms, and at least in the United States, about 80% of our salmon is farmed. That's largely true in most of the world. In those fish farms, typically fish will be kept for about 2 years to grow before they are harvested to become seafood. In our case, it's typically something like 4 to 6 weeks. So actually, it's far more efficient in terms of time and resources than growing fish in conventional ways.
If you talk to the purists, they'll say that wild caught fish is so much tastier because the animals have swum around, they've exercised, they've eaten a wild type diet. Can you exercise your bits of meat?
In our case, we found that the nutrients we feed the cells is actually a far more important aspect of whether something will taste like wild salmon or not. And so we really sort of start by trying to understand what is under all of that complexity, like what molecules make one type of salmon taste different from another, and try to recreate that same set of nutrients for those cells so that we can achieve the right flavor profile.
What is the taste like? If you offered this to somebody, could they tell it apart from something I caught with a hook out in the ocean?
For the first time, we were able to do a blinded study of over 100 participants, people who regularly eat salmon, and we compared our smoked salmon to one of the most famous smoked salmon brands, I'd say, in the United States. But this was the first time that there was no statistically significant difference in preference between the two. And actually, for us, the greatest compliment that we can receive for something like this is, somebody will try a piece of salmon and just say, like, yeah, I don't know, that tastes like salmon.
What's the timeline to market?
We are on the menu. We're on the menu at a bunch of restaurants in the US. We also have started a program where people can purchase it from our website.
So it is already happening, isn't it? Aria Elfenbein there from Wild Type. That's where we have to leave it for this week. I hope that has been sufficient food for thought and whetted your appetite for the foods of the future. Thanks again to Petra Merzen for putting it all together. We'll be back with the latest science news from the week on Friday, when we'll be unpacking an infectious disease called cyclosporiasis that causes explosive cases of diarrhoea. Where's that all coming from? And why space satellites are the new frontier in modern day conflict. Do also check out our weekly question and answer show where no question is a stupid question. You can get that wherever you get your podcasts or at nakedscientist.com/ask. And finally, if you appreciate what we do for you here at The Naked Scientist, do please consider making a donation to keep the show on the road. You can do that safely, securely and effectively and very simply over at nakedscientist.com/donate. From all of us here at The Naked Scientist, thanks for listening. I'm Chris Smith, and until next time, goodbye.